out on the outskirts of a small but rapidly growing suburban town, a long stretch of weather, beaten asphalt cut through fields of golden grass. This was where the last pieces of open land brushed shoulders with a creeping neighborhood development. Cookie cutter houses lined up like soldiers, plastic mailboxes standing at attention, HOA rules printed on laminated flyers and slipped into doors every month. Just beyond the new subdivision's limit lay my property, a sprawling, 100-acre ranch dotted with old oak trees, horse paddocks, and a single gravel driveway that stretched for half a mile before reaching the main house. The land had been in my family for 3 generations. It was a working ranch once, and though now it operated more as a private refuge than a business, the fences, trails, and outbuildings were all maintained with the same diligence my grandfather had taught me. For as long as I'd lived there, the driveway had been a quiet, private road, gated at the end where it met the county lane. The gate was heavy, steel tubing welded into a practical crosshatch design, and topped with a simple sign Privas Parparpiwaios Tiras Pesain Gems. A pair of sturdy posts anchored it into the ground. The hinges groaned but held strong, and the lock had a satisfying weight. It was not decorative, it was functional. Everyone in the area understood that crossing that gate without permission was stepping onto someone else's land. That unspoken understanding began to fray the year the HOA development popped up. Overnight, it seemed that a sea of new residents, many of them unaccustomed to rural boundaries, started moving in. They were eager to take advantage of country living, while clinging to suburban expectations. Complaints about the smell of manure from neighboring farms started appearing in the HOA newsletter. Letters were sent to the county about unsightly barns visible from the main road. And slowly, more cars began to appear on the little county lane. Cars that didn't always respect the private signs dotting my fences. At first, it was just a few lost delivery drivers or curious families thinking the gravel driveway was a shortcut. I installed an additional "No Through Road" sign and chained the gate closed. But one person, in particular, seemed to think none of this applied to her. Her name, at least the name the other residents whispered, was Karen, though it might as well have been a title. She lived 2 blocks deep in the HOA subdivision, in a pastel, painted house with perfect hedges. She chaired several committees, according to neighbors who vented on local Facebook groups, and she had a reputation for making rules for others while exempting herself from them. I first noticed her silver SUV rolling through my gate on a humid summer morning. The ranch dog barked, alerting me to movement near the road. When I peered out from the barn, there she was, driving slowly, as if surveying the property. At the time, I assumed she was lost, maybe following a faulty GPS. But a few days later, I spotted the same SUV again, gliding down my driveway with a kind of casual entitlement. The gate had been left ajar because I'd been moving equipment in and out, and she took full advantage. I reinforced the chain and hung an even larger sign. Yet the SUV kept showing up. Sometimes it came mid-morning, sometimes at dusk. Always uninvited. Always driving straight past the sign and up toward my paddocks before turning around. There was never a wave, never an apology. Just the crunch of tires on gravel, and then silence. The intrusion gnawed at me. This wasn't just about inconvenience, it was about boundary and respect. Out here, property lines aren't an abstract legal concept. They're real. They're fences you mend, gates you build, livestock you protect. Someone crossing them uninvited isn't just rude. It can spook animals, damage equipment, even lead to accidents. My grandfather used to say that a gate left open is a problem waiting to happen. And here was someone treating my gate like a revolving door. One evening, after I'd caught her SUV for the third time in a week, I drove down to the gate and found the chain cut clean through. It wasn't frayed or rusted, it was sliced, as if someone had used bolt cutters. That sent a hot surge of anger through me. Not only was she trespassing, she was actively defeating the measures I put in place. I replaced the chain with a heavier one and added a new lock, but it was clear the situation had escalated. I started documenting everything: dates, times, descriptions of the vehicle. I mounted a small trail camera on a post near the gate, angled discreetly so its motion sensor would catch any car entering. The footage began to form a pattern: same SUV, same driver, same disregard. Sometimes she even slowed at the gate, as if daring me to confront her. Other times she rolled through without pause. In one clip, she even stopped to move a traffic cone I'd placed there as a deterrent, tossing it aside like it was a toy. Neighbors told me that Karen had a pet theory about easement rights. That because the driveway connected two public roads at opposite ends of my properties, which it did not. She had the right to use it as a shortcut. This was nonsense. The driveway dead ended at my barn. There was no through road, no easement, no legal gray area. She was simply trespassing. But like many self-appointed enforcers of neighborhood order, she believed rules were something to interpret, not follow. It wasn't just me noticing. Delivery trucks started showing up asking if my driveway was the back entrance to the HOA development. Tire tracks began appearing off the edge of the gravel, chewing into the grass. Once, I found a soda can tossed out near the paddocks. Small signs of disregard, but signs nonetheless. If left unchecked, it would grow worse. That's when I decided to escalate, quietly, methodically. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. If a polite sign and a locked chain weren't enough, then I needed something that would send a message loud and clear, something legal but impossible to ignore. My ranch had always been a place of self-reliance. When you have land, you solve problems with your hands and your head. I spent a week researching options. Motion, activated sprinklers, tire spikes, illegal, cattle guards, surveillance warnings. I consulted a lawyer friend about liability. I wasn't interested in hurting anyone, only in deterring trespass. Finally, I settled on a plan that was equal parts old school ranching ingenuity and modern security thinking. First, I reinforced the gate posts with concrete, ensuring they could withstand a significant push. Then I installed a second, inner gate about 20 feet inside the driveway, a kind of airlock for vehicles. This inner gate was lighter, but could be latched quickly. Between the two gates, I laid down a grid of loose gravel mixed with a harmless but messy marking powder, one that would cling to tires and leave a bright, unmistakable trail. It wasn't permanent, it would wash off after a few miles, but it would show exactly which car had crossed the boundary. At the same time, I upgraded my cameras to transmit footage directly to my phone. No more waiting to retrieve memory cards. I wanted real-time alerts. I also posted a new sign at the gate's entrance in bold red letters. Neno tiras pescienge pirivat e reyen sach ilv iels recauarded. Underneath that, I added a smaller line, Vio tars, ylbe reparid. By the time I was done, the setup looked like a cross between a farm gate and a security checkpoint. Not unfriendly, but unmistakably off limits. My hope was that Karen would see the changes and finally get the message. That hope lasted about 48 hours. The first morning after I finished, I got an alert on my phone. The camera had detected motion. When I opened the feed, there she was again, the silver SUV idling at the gate. She got out, looked at the sign, and then, unbelievably, began unlatching the chain. I watched in real time as she rolled through the first gate, right onto the marking powder. When she reached the inner gate, she stopped, clearly surprised. There was no room to turn around without backing into the powder again. She sat there for a moment, engine running, then reversed all the way back out. Later that day, bright streaks of the powder showed up along the main road, leading straight to the HOA subdivision. Like breadcrumbs, they pointed directly to her driveway. I documented everything. Photos, video, timestamps. My lawyer friend chuckled when I showed him. "That's about as clear as it gets," he said. "She's trespassing. You've warned her. Now you've got proof." But as anyone who's ever dealt with a true HOA Karen knows, evidence alone doesn't always stop the behavior. In fact, sometimes it provokes it. Sure enough, the next evening, I found the outer gate's chain cut again. Clean, deliberate. The inner gate was left ajar, the marking powder disturbed, and parked boldly near my barn, as if she owned the place, was the silver SUV. That was the moment the situation shifted from nuisance to confrontation. She wasn't just testing boundaries anymore, she was challenging them outright. And I realized, standing there with the evening sun slanting across the paddocks, that I'd reached the point of no return. If I wanted this to end, I'd have to set a trap she'd never see coming. Not something vindictive, but something undeniable. I watched her car back out slowly, powder clinging to its tires again, and disappear down the driveway. My hands tightened around the gate latch. Enough was enough. The next morning, before dawn, I began preparing the next phase. A plan that would not only catch her red-handed but also force the HOA's hand, making her behavior a public matter they could no longer ignore. The trap wouldn't be dangerous, but it would be impossible to wriggle out of. As the sun rose over the ranch, burning mist off the grass, I felt a kind of grim calm. The line had been crossed. Now it was time to draw one she couldn't. The plan began, like most good plans on a ranch, with a pencil sketch on the back of an old feed store receipt. I sat at the kitchen table before dawn, the smell of coffee and hay mixing in the cool air, drawing boxes and arrows as if I were plotting a cattle drive. Every element had to be legal, non-harmful, and obvious enough to stand up in any confrontation. But it also had to be subtle enough that Karen wouldn't notice until she was already caught in it. I started with the physical barrier. The double gate airlock I had installed was working to slow her down, but she had cut the chain twice already. Chains could be replaced or reinforced. Bolt cutters could cut steel, but not solid iron. So I ordered a pair of heavy, farm-grade pipe gates, the kind meant to hold back livestock, and had them delivered that same afternoon. With a post-hole digger, concrete, and an old friend from down the road who owed me a favor, we set the new posts deep. When the gates swung shut, they overlapped, leaving no gap to slip through. A keyed padlock at the top and a hidden secondary latch at the bottom made it impossible to simply lift or wiggle them open. But a gate alone wouldn't be enough. Karen's behavior had made it clear. She believed she was entitled to drive through, and she would continue until someone stopped her publicly. That meant whatever I did next had to produce undeniable evidence and draw outside authority. So while the concrete set, I upgraded my camera system again. This time I installed 2 wireless cameras with solar panels, each aimed at a different angle. One directly on the outer gate, one on the inner gate and the driveway beyond. Both streamed live to my phone and to a secure cloud account. Then I went a step further. Using bright yellow surveyor's paint, I marked a large rectangle just inside the inner gate on the gravel. It looked like a parking bay, but was really a zone where a second, hidden camera pointed upward to capture license plates and driver faces from below the windshield line. At night, a small infrared floodlight would illuminate the area without being visible to the naked eye. Anyone who stopped there would be recorded from 3 angles. Still, cameras alone might not dissuade her. Karen's type often thrived on confrontation, believing they could talk their way out of anything. I needed a way to involve the HOA and local authorities automatically. No more, he said. She said, no more waiting until she was gone. That's when I remembered a neighbor who ran a towing service. He had told me once, over beers, that under state law, any unauthorized vehicle left on private property could be towed at the owner's expense, as long as there were clear signs. I ordered new signs. Private e parapoi, ua eradi vcs ylbetio wide imdiatly, in large black letters on reflective white metal. I posted one at the outer gate, another at the inner gate, and a third on a fence post visible from the driveway. Each was dated and photographed for my records. Then I called my neighbor and arranged for his truck to be on standby. All I had to do was text him a photo, and he'd roll out. By the time the setup was complete, my gate looked less like a rural entrance and more like a controlled checkpoint. Some might have called it overkill, but out here a man protects his boundary as firmly as his herd. And after months of watching Karen cut chains and roll her SUV wherever she pleased, I felt no guilt about going to such lengths. Days passed quietly. No silver SUV appeared. The cameras caught only delivery vans turning around and the occasional deer slipping through the fence line. For a brief moment, I wondered if she'd finally gotten the message. But experience told me she was only biding her time, working herself up for the next move. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed at 6:17 a.m., motion detected at gate camera 1. I opened the feed and there she was, the silver SUV idling at the outer gate. She got out, wearing sunglasses despite the early hour, and inspected the new sign. The camera zoomed just enough to catch her frown. She tugged at the chain, found it locked, and went back to her vehicle. For a moment I thought she might turn around. Instead, she produced a bolt cutter from her back seat, large, bright red handles glinting in the sun, and began cutting. Snap. The chain fell. She swung the first gate open and drove through slowly, like a predator entering a trap. My pulse quickened, but I stayed calm. I watched on the second feed as she reached the inner gate. She got out again, tested the lock, and scowled. This one was solid iron. The bolt cutter wouldn't fit. She tried anyway, struggling. Then, frustrated, she climbed back into the SUV and idled in the marked rectangle I'd painted. 3 cameras recorded her from 3 angles. I tapped out a quick text to my towing service neighbor. She's here. Now. While I waited for his reply, I noticed something telling on the footage. Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was on her phone, gesturing angrily, as if calling someone. Maybe an HOA board member, maybe the police, who knows. But under our state's trespass laws, she had no leg to stand on. Everything was documented. The signs were clear, and she was sitting on my property with bolt cutters in her lap. My neighbor replied with a thumbs up emoji. 10 minutes later, another motion alert popped up. Camera 3 showed a tow truck pulling up quietly behind the outer gate. The driver swung the gate open, stepped through, and approached the SUV. From my vantage point on the house porch half a mile away, I could see a faint dust cloud rising where they were. The footage was surreal. Karen burst from her SUV, shouting soundlessly. My cameras didn't record audio. Waving her arms as the tow operator inspected the signs, took photos, and then began hooking up her vehicle. She paced like a caged animal. pointing at the road, at the gate, at the sky. But there was nothing she could do. Within minutes, the SUV's front wheels were lifted. Karen tried to stand in front of the truck. The operator simply waited, arms crossed, until she moved. Then he eased the truck forward, SUV in tow, out through the gate and down the county lane. Karen stood there, hands on her hips, left behind on my gravel driveway. I switched to the outer camera feed just in time to see her storm after the tow truck on foot, disappearing from view. I sat back, heart pounding. Months of intrusion had just culminated in one clean, legal response. But the situation wasn't over. My phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, a new notification popped up, a voicemail transcription. It was Karen, livid, demanding her car back, accusing me of illegal detention and violating easement rights, threatening lawsuits and HOA action. I saved the voicemail, attached it to the growing file. Then I called the sheriff's office myself, explained what had happened, and offered to email them the footage. The deputy who answered sounded almost amused. "She's been warned before," he said. "You're well within your rights. We'll send someone to take a statement." By the time the deputy arrived an hour later, Karen had returned to the gate in a different car, this one driven by a man who looked like her husband. They parked on the county lane, outside my property, and filmed the gates with their phones, gesturing dramatically. I stayed on my porch, sipping coffee, while the deputy reviewed my footage. He shook his head. "Textbook trespass. You've got everything documented. If she keeps it up, we can issue a citation or even press charges. Up to you." I wasn't interested in court. Yet, my goal was deterrence. "Let's see how she handles the tow bill first," I said. The deputy left, and the couple eventually drove away. For the rest of the day, the ranch was quiet. No cars, no cameras, just the wind through the grass. But I knew the battle wasn't truly finished. People like Karen rarely retreat gracefully. They double down, rally allies, and look for loopholes. And indeed, that evening a flurry of posts appeared on the local neighborhood Facebook group. Screenshots forwarded to me by sympathetic neighbors. Karen was claiming she'd been ambushed on a public road, that my illegal gate had trapped her, that the HOA would take action. Most commenters were skeptical. A few even posted photos of my clearly marked private property signs. But a small handful echoed her outrage, calling me a bully and warning that rural landowners think they're above the law. Scrolling through those comments by lamplight, I felt both vindicated and uneasy. The trap had worked, but it had also escalated the conflict into the public eye. Now it wasn't just Karen, it was the HOA as an institution. And HOAs have lawyers. I spent that night drafting a detailed timeline of events from the first trespass to the tow. I printed screenshots, photos, and signed receipts. I even uploaded the camera footage to a private cloud drive with a redundant backup. If things got litigious, I wanted every fact lined up like fence posts. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel. It claimed that my driveway constituted a historic access route between two roads and that by blocking it I was interfering with community ingress and egress. It demanded I remove the gates immediately or face appropriate legal remedies. The letter was nonsense. My driveway dead ended at my barn. It had never connected two roads. The so-called historic access was nothing but a rumor Karen had spread. Still, the tone was threatening. I scanned the letter and sent it to my lawyer friend. He called back within the hour, chuckling. "They're bluffing," he said. "Classic HOA saber, rattling. But you'll want to respond formally." "I'll draft something." He did. The reply was crisp and factual, citing county property maps, easement law, and the trespass statute. It also included a polite but firm demand that the HOA cease encouraging its members to use my property without permission. We sent it certified mail the same day. For a week afterward, there was silence. No SUVs, no letters, no social media drama. The powder on my driveway faded after a rain. The gates stayed locked. For the first time in months, the ranch felt like my own again. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, I got another motion alert. The feed showed not Karen, but two men in reflective vests at the gate, measuring, pointing, and taking notes on clipboards. They were surveyors. County contractors by the look of their truck. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just Karen freelancing anymore. This was some sort of official action. I pulled up the county website and found nothing about road projects in my area. I called the sheriff's office. They had no record of a work order. Whoever these surveyors were, they weren't there on my request. As I watched them on the feed, a cold realization settled over me. Karen had lost the first battle, but was opening a new front. If she could convince the county, or at least create enough confusion, she might try to get my driveway declared a public easement retroactively. Standing on my porch, phone in hand, I felt the old rancher's instinct stir again. Fences, gates, traps. All of it was about drawing lines and holding them. The trap had caught her once. But now the real fight was beginning. A fight not just over a gate, but over who controlled the very definition of the land itself. The morning the surveyors appeared at my gate, the air had that brittle stillness that comes before a storm. From the porch, I could see their white truck, idling on the shoulder of the county lane, hazard lights blinking, orange vests moving like bright birds among the tall grass. They weren't trespassing yet, just setting tripods and marking points along the ditch, but their presence was enough to tighten the knot in my stomach. This was no casual drive, by inspection. Someone had sent them. I slipped on boots and a hat, took a slow walk down the gravel driveway, and stopped well back from the outer gate. They noticed me watching and gave the polite wave of contractors used to working in contested spaces. One of them pointed at the gate, then at his clipboard, but neither tried to cross. Through the bars I could see the orange paint they'd sprayed on the county's side of the ditch. Small arrows and numbers, a code only they understood. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos of everything: truck plates, company name on the door, even the GPS coordinates from my map app. Documentation was the rancher's shield. I wasn't about to let this become another. He said, she said. When I called the county road office, a bored clerk put me on hold, then came back sounding uncertain. We don't have any active projects there, she said. If they're surveyors, they're not ours. Could be private. Private, meaning the HOA, or Karen personally, had hired them. That fit her pattern. If she couldn't bulldoze her way past a locked gate, she'd try to redraw the map under it. I let the surveyors work. They never crossed the fence line, and after an hour they packed up and drove off. But by then the damage was done, not to the land, but to the peace of mind I'd rebuilt since the Tao. A gate keeps people out. It can't stop paperwork. That night, after feeding the horses, I spread the photos across my kitchen table. Each image felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. The survey marks ran parallel to my driveway for 100 yards, then stopped at the corner where the old stone fence began. The boundary line my grandfather had shown me as a boy. That fence was older than any house in the HOA, older than most of the county records. If Karen was trying to claim a historic easement. This was where she'd start. My lawyer friend confirmed my suspicion. If they're trying to establish an easement, he said over the phone, they'll need evidence. It was used by the public openly and continuously for a certain number of years. They don't have that, but they might still file something with the county to force a hearing. You'll want your ducks in a row. So I gathered my ducks. I spent 2 days digging through family files in the attic, pulling deeds, maps, and old photos. There were black and white pictures of my grandfather standing by the same gate in the 1950s, hand on a post, "No trespassing" sign behind him. I found receipts for gravel deliveries, fencing permits, even an old letter from the county commissioner thanking my father for allowing temporary access during a storm clean up. A letter that explicitly said, temporary. I scanned it all, dated it, filed it. My property wasn't just land, it was a paper trail of private ownership stretching back decades. But while I worked inside, outside the narrative was shifting. The HOA newsletter arrived in my mailbox that Friday. The lead story wasn't about lawn violations or community barbecues. It was about me. Local ranch blocks access to historic route. The headline declared, over a blurry photo of my gate. The article claimed residents had used the back road for decades, that my new barriers were endangering community safety, and that the board was exploring legal options. It was pure fiction. But newsletters have a way of turning fiction into fact, especially among people who've only ever known sacks and sidewalks. Comments on the HOA's Facebook page began to echo the same phrases. Historic route, blocked access, safety issue. A narrative was being built brick by brick. I didn't respond publicly. Engaging online would only feed the fire. Instead, I called the county clerk's office and asked to be notified of any filings concerning my parcel. The clerk promised to flag it. The following Monday, a certified letter arrived, this time not from the HOA, but from a law firm in the city. It was more polished than the first 4 pages citing case law, alleging that by obstructing a public thoroughfare, I was creating a nuisance and violating easement rights. It threatened an injunction if I didn't remove my gates within 10 days. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer friend. His reply was brief. They're bluffing. We'll answer. Sit tight. Sitting tight is easier said than done when strangers keep circling your fences. Twice that week, I spotted unfamiliar cars slowing near the gate, passengers filming with their phones. Once I found a printed flyer tacked to my mailbox urging, community members, 2. Stand up for our rights. It had no signature but smelled of Karen. The stress seeped into daily life. Every time my phone buzzed with a motion alert, my chest tightened. Most alerts were deer or wind, but each one felt like a warning shot. Out here, solitude is supposed to be a shield. Now it felt like exposure. And yet, in a strange way, the pressure clarified my resolve. My grandfather used to say, land doesn't care who owns it, but people do. I understood now what he meant. Ownership isn't just a name on a deed, it's the willingness to defend boundaries when they're tested. So I doubled down. I met with a professional surveyor, this one licensed by the county, and paid for a full boundary survey of my ranch. The crew spent 2 days setting official markers, mapping every inch of the driveway, and certifying that it ended well inside my property. When the report came back, stamped and signed, it left no doubt, no easement, no public road, no historic access. I also contacted the sheriff's office again and provided them with the new letters and footage. The deputy assured me that unless a court ordered otherwise, My gates were legal and trespassers could still be cited. By the end of the week, my file was thicker than a feed catalog. It contained everything: deeds, maps, surveys, photos, letters, even screenshots of Karen's posts claiming community rights. Then came the inevitable escalation. Late one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, my cameras caught a familiar silver SUV creeping along the county lane. It didn't stop at the gate this time. Instead, it pulled off into the ditch a few yards down, where the old stone fence met the brush. A figure got out, Karen, and began walking along the fence line, phone in hand, as if recording evidence. She didn't cross the fence, but she came close enough to touch it. It was theater, not trespass, a performance for whatever case she was building. I watched from my porch, heart steady now. The trap had already been sprung once. This was the second act. I didn't confront her. I simply documented, as always. After 10 minutes she left, SUV disappearing into the subdivision's maze of identical streets. 2 days later, the county clerk called. "We've received a petition from the HOA requesting a hearing to establish a prescriptive easement across your property," she said. "You'll get official notice soon." There it was, the move I'd been expecting. A prescriptive easement would, if granted, give the HOA a legal right to use my driveway despite my objections. It required proof of continuous, open use for a statutory period, usually 20 years. They had none. But they were trying anyway, hoping I'd roll over or settle. I thanked the clerk, hung up, and sat for a long time staring at the fading light outside my window. The fight had shifted from gates and chains to hearings and petitions. But the principle was the same: a line drawn on the land, a question of who could cross it. I called my lawyer friend. He was calm. "We'll respond," he said. "You have the survey, the deeds, the photos. This is your land. They're trying to use intimidation to create rights they don't have. Courts don't like that." Still, the hearing meant weeks of preparation, paperwork, and the possibility, however slim, that a judge might side with the HOA. And Karen wasn't just any resident. She was a board member, used to getting her way. She'd already shown she'd cut chains and hire surveyors. She'd likely bring witnesses, affidavits, maybe even old maps doctored to look official. I spent the next evenings planning my presentation. Photos of the gate dating back decades. Witness statements from neighbors who remembered the driveway always being private. The old letter from the county commissioner calling access temporary. The certified survey. Every piece a nail in the coffin of their claim. Through it all, the ranch went on. Horses needed feeding. Fences needed mending. The rhythm of work kept me grounded. And in those quiet moments, fixing a loose board, topping off a water trough, I remembered why I was doing this. Not for pride, but for stewardship. A rancher doesn't just own land, he's entrusted with it. Boundaries are part of that trust. On the morning of the scheduled hearing, I loaded my pickup with a binder full of documents and drove into town. The courthouse was a squat brick building with peeling paint, the kind of place where property lines had been argued for 100 years. Inside, a small hearing room held a scattering of folding chairs. At one table sat Karen and 2 men in suits, her attorneys. At the other sat me and my lawyer friend, boots dusty from the drive. Karen avoided my eyes. Her attorneys shuffled papers. One of them glanced at my binder and frowned slightly, as if realizing this wouldn't be the pushover they'd hoped. As the hearing officer entered and the room quieted, I felt that same grim calm I'd felt the morning I set the trap. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about drawing a line and holding it. Outside, clouds were gathering, promising rain. Inside, the storm was about to break. The hearing room smelled faintly of old paper and coffee grounds. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in a flat, colorless glow. A row of state flags sagged against the wall behind the dais. It wasn't a courtroom. No wood paneling, no jury box, just a converted conference space with folding chairs and a single long table at the front where the hearing officer sat, flanked by a clerk with a laptop. The atmosphere was quiet, but tense, like the hush before a thunderclap. I set my thick binder on the table with a soft thump. My lawyer friend sat beside me, his posture calm but alert. Across from us, Karen perched stiffly in a navy blazer. Hands folded on top of a stack of papers she clearly hoped would transform rumor into right. On either side of her sat two men in dark suits, her attorneys, scrolling on tablets, whispering strategy. Karen didn't meet my eyes. She stared at the flag instead, jaw tight. The hearing officer began with a perfunctory explanation of the process. This wasn't a trial. No one was going to jail. But the decision would have the force of law. If the petition succeeded, my private driveway would be declared an easement, and the HOA would gain the right to cross it forever. If it failed, my gates would stand and the HOA's claim would be dead. On paper, it was just a property dispute. In reality, it was the culmination of months of trespass, intimidation, and rumor. Karen's lead attorney stood first. He spoke in the slow, deliberate cadence of someone used to city zoning meetings. According to him, the community had historically accessed my driveway as a secondary road for decades. He cited vague, resident affidavits, claiming they had oozed the road without interference. He produced a color, printed aerial photo from the 1990s with a faint line he called the Old Back Road. It looked like a footpath through the grass that never touched the county lane. He didn't mention bolt cutters or tow trucks. His version of events was tidy, clinical, sanitized. When he finished, Karen leaned forward and added a prepared statement about safety and emergency access. She painted a picture of a fragile community hemmed in by a single road, desperate for a second exit in case of fire or flood. She implied, without evidence, that by blocking my driveway, I was endangering lives. Her voice trembled just enough to sound rehearsed but earnest. The hearing officer nodded, took notes, asked no questions. Then it was our turn. My lawyer friend rose unhurried, binder in hand. He began with a simple point. There is no easement. He held up the certified survey, stamped and signed by the county's own licensed surveyor, showing the driveway as a dead and wholly within my parcel. He placed it on the table for the clerk. Then he produced the original deed from my grandfather, the subsequent transfers, and decades of tax records. Everyone describing the same boundaries, no mention of public access. Next he held up black and white photographs my grandfather at the same gate in the 1950s, a private, sign clearly visible behind him. Then color photos from the 1980s, the 2000s, and finally last month, same gate, same signs. He explained that far from being an uninterfered route, the driveway had been posted and locked for generations. Any occasional neighbor who wandered in had done so by permission, not right. When he finished laying the groundwork, I took the floor briefly, not as a lawyer, but as the person living it. I spoke plainly, no legal jargon, about the months of intrusion. I described finding chains cut, gates left swinging, livestock spooked. I told the story of the tow truck, not angrily, but factually, as proof of ongoing trespass. I emphasized that my only goal had been to protect my property, not harm anyone. Then I stepped back. The hearing officer leaned forward for the first time. "Do you have evidence of the trespass?" he asked. My lawyer opened a laptop and played a short clip from the camera system. Karen's silver SUV rolling through the gate, bolt cutters in hand. Another clip of the bright powder trailing to her driveway. Another of the tow truck hooking up the vehicle while private property. Signs glared in the background. The room went very still. One of Karen's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. The other stared at his tablet as if hoping it would swallow him. Karen's face flushed a mottled red. She began whispering urgently to her lawyers. They whispered back, slower, heads close. The hearing officer watched the clips to the end, then looked at Karen. "Do you dispute this is you?" he asked. Karen's attorney intervened quickly. "We're not here to discuss alleged trespass, only the legal status of the road." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Understood. But alleged historic use is relevant. The evidence suggests the road has been locked and posted for many years. That weighs against a prescriptive easement." He turned back to us. "Anything further?" My lawyer handed over the old letter from the county commissioner thanking my father for temporary access during a storm cleanup. Temporary was underlined in yellow. "This," he said, "is the only time the county ever used the driveway, and it was by written permission. Not continuous, not public, not adverse." The officer nodded slowly, made another note, and closed his folder. "I'll take this under advisement," he said. "A written decision will be issued within 30 days. And that was it. No gavel, no verdict. Just a pause, and then chairs scraping as people stood. Karen gathered her papers stiffly and walked out without looking at me. Her attorneys trailed behind, murmuring. The clerk packed up her laptop. My lawyer friend and I shook hands, relieved but cautious. Nothing was final until the decision arrived. Outside the courthouse, the sky had darkened to a heavy slate gray. The first drops of rain spattered the windshield as we climbed into the pickup. "You did well," my lawyer said. "She came in with rumors. You came in with records. Judges like records." Back at the ranch, the rain deepened into a steady drumming, turning the gravel driveway slick and dark. I closed the gates, checked the locks twice, and stood for a long moment watching water beat on the steel tubing. The trap had done its job. The hearing had gone as well as it could. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered caution. Karen wouldn't give up easily. Even if the easement failed, she might find another angle. A complaint to a state agency, a nuisance suit, a smear campaign online. Over the next week, the ranch returned to a tentative calm. No SUVs lingered on the county lane. The cameras caught only deer, coyotes, and the occasional delivery truck turning around. The HOA's Facebook page fell silent except for garden tips and lost dog posts. It was as if the storm had passed. I used the lull to shore up everything I could. I had the gates repainted bright red for visibility. I replaced the old, private, sign with a new reflective one. I moved the powder grid farther inside the inner gate and refreshed it after the rain. I backed up all my footage again. If there was going to be a second wave, I wanted to be ready. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived from the county in my mailbox. My hands shook slightly as I slid it open. Inside was a single-page decision from the hearing officer, petition denied. The text was dry and bureaucratic, but beautiful to my eyes. It stated that the HOA had failed to demonstrate continuous, open, and adverse public use, and that no prescriptive easement exists. It concluded with a line that felt like vindication carved in stone. The driveway in question remains private property under the control of the owner. I read it twice, then pinned it to the kitchen corkboard with a thumbtack. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the oaks, I stood at the gate and breathed deep. The air smelled of wet earth and hay, clean after the storm. The fight had been long, but the boundary held. Then, in the dying light, my phone buzzed a new motion alert from the outer camera. I opened the feed expecting a deer. Instead, I saw a familiar figure, Karen, standing just outside the gate on the county lane, phone raised, filming the sign. She wasn't trespassing this time. She was smiling, a small, tight smile, as if she'd thought of something new. I watched her zoom in on the lock, on the private sign, on the bright red gates. Then she lowered the phone, turned, and walked back to her car. The SUV rolled away slowly, taillights glowing like embers in the dusk. The camera feed went dark. The ranch was quiet again, but a ripple of unease moved through me. The hearing had been the climax of one battle, but maybe not of the war. People like Karen rarely retreat for good. They regroup. They look for cracks. They wait. I closed the app, locked the door, and went about feeding the horses. Whatever was coming next, I'd be ready. The land had taught me patience, and patience was the one thing Karen didn't seem to have. The weeks after the hearing felt almost unreal. The gates stood untouched. The cameras showed only wind, blown leaves, and deer nosing at the fence line. And for the first time since I'd installed the powder trap, I slept through the night. The county's decision denying the HOA's easement had been printed, laminated, and bolted to a post just inside the driveway, a quiet but official, looking warning to anyone tempted to test my boundaries. For a little while, the ranch became what it was meant to be, a place of quiet labor instead of constant defense. Then the letters began. The first envelope arrived from a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a neatly typed notice of violation from a state environmental agency, alleging that unauthorized obstruction of a historically navigable path might have adverse impacts on wildlife corridors. No signature, only a generic departmental header. The second envelope, arriving 2 days later, was a community safety advisory from the HOA warning residents to be aware of potential hazards on adjacent properties. The third was a printout of a social media post, my gate in the background, a caption accusing me of endangering children by blocking emergency access. Each item by itself was petty. Together they formed a pattern. Karen had lost in the hearing room, but she hadn't retreated. She had simply shifted terrain. If she couldn't get a legal easement, she would try to make me look like a menace to public safety, a polluter, an outlaw. She would nibble at the edges, hoping some agency or inspector would do what the county had refused to do. I knew better than to ignore paper. Every notice, even the unofficial ones, went into a new binder labeled Karen Phase 2. I photocopied envelopes, logged dates, and cross-checked signatures. My lawyer friend reviewed each one over coffee at my kitchen table. So far, he said, this is all bark. No agency has actually opened a file, but she's trying to provoke them. A week later, an SUV from the State Wildlife Department pulled up at the outer gate. 2 inspectors in green jackets stepped out, clipboards in hand. They were polite but firm. They had received a citizen complaint about hazardous substances and trapped wildlife. They wanted to see my gates, my fencing, my powder. I walked them through everything slowly and transparently. The hazardous substance was nothing more than non-toxic chalk tracking powder. The fencing was standard, the gates lawful. I handed them copies of the county's decision and my survey. By the time they left, their tone had softened to apologetic. Looks fine to us, one said. We'll close the complaint. That evening I checked Karen's social media page. A new post had appeared. a blurry photo of the inspectors at my gate with a caption claiming the state was investigating me for wildlife destruction. Comments piled up, mostly from the same handful of HOA loyalists. It was pure theater. No mention that the inspectors had already found nothing wrong. But the tactic achieved something subtler. It kept me under a cloud. Each new post, or letter, or notice forced me to respond, to document, to open the gate to officials. Each response took time, and Karen's crowd read every visit as proof of wrongdoing. It was psychological warfare dressed as civic concern. I adapted. The ranch had taught me patience, and patience is built on routine. Each morning after feeding the horses, I did a perimeter check, photographing the gates and the powder grid. Each evening I downloaded the camera footage and uploaded it to a secure cloud. Every letter from any agency went into a binder with a cover sheet summarizing my reply. I wasn't just defending the property anymore. I was building an archive of harassment. Then Karen escalated. One Saturday afternoon, as a slow autumn wind stirred dust across the lane, a convoy of cars pulled up outside my gate. 3 SUVs, each with HOA decals on the rear windows. Out stepped Karen, 2 board members, and a man in a neon vest with a clipboard. They planted themselves just outside the fence and began taking photos, measuring tape stretched between posts, gesturing to each other like a road crew. They weren't trespassing, but they were staging a show. The man in the vest affixed a laminated sign to the county's right, of way stake. Future emergency access route, pending review. It looked official at a glance but had no agency name, just the HOA's logo. I watched from the porch, phone in hand. My instinct was to march down and confront them, but I didn't. The cameras were rolling. That was enough. After half an hour of photo, taking and sign, posting, the group climbed back into their SUVs and left in a spray of gravel. Within hours, the photos appeared online. Karen and her allies, surveying the site of a proposed emergency lane. The caption claimed the HOA was working with state and county officials to restore traditional access road blocked by a rogue landowner. It was fiction, but slickly packaged. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some skeptical, all spreading the narrative. The next day, my mailbox contained another envelope, this one from a county fire safety committee. It was an invitation, not an order, to attend a public meeting about improving emergency evacuation routes. Karen's name appeared on the agenda as a concerned resident. My driveway was listed as a potential secondary route. It was clear. She was trying to reframe the fight as a safety crusade. If she could gather enough public pressure, maybe the county would revisit its decision. I went to the meeting. It was held in the same drab municipal building as the hearing, but in a larger room with folding chairs arranged in a horse show. Local residents filled the seats, murmuring. A projector displayed a map of the area with color-coded roads. My driveway was marked in dotted red. Karen sat near the front, hair perfectly arranged, whispering to a man with a badge reading, "Fire Safety Volunteer." When my turn came to speak, I stayed calm. I explained that my driveway was private, built to ranch standards, not suitable for emergency convoys. I showed photos of the gates and powder grid. I handed out copies of the county's denial of the easement. I emphasized that I wasn't opposed to public safety. I had even offered to unlock the gate temporarily for emergency vehicles during actual disasters. But that permanent access was neither legal nor safe. The committee listened politely, took notes, and moved on. Karen gave a passionate plea about children trapped by wildfires, waving a printout of an article about a fire hundreds of miles away. Applause came from her corner of the room. But the chairperson closed the discussion by noting that any changes would require the consent of the property owner. When I left the meeting, the sun was setting, streaking the sky orange and violet. Karen was in the parking lot talking to a local reporter, gesturing toward me as I walked by. Cameras clicked. I kept my eyes forward, unlocked my truck, and drove home without a word. That night, the HOA's page lit up again. A photo of me leaving the meeting with a caption accusing me of walking out on community safety discussions. The comments were vicious. I shut off the phone and sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the crickets. Out beyond the fence, the powder grid glimmered faintly under the security lights, a pale trace like frost. The gates were still shut. The locks were still firm. But the battle had shifted from property lines to public perception. I realized then that the trap they never saw coming wasn't just the powder grid or the tow truck. It was the archive. Every letter, every inspection, every sign and meeting. All of it documented, dated, cross-referenced. Karen had assumed she could control the narrative, but she had left a trail: 2 posts, signs, claims, even the fake future emergency access marker with the HOA logo. If the time came, I could lay it out for a judge, a journalist, or a regulator in one clean timeline. Her campaign of harassment would look exactly like what it was. The question was when to spring it. For now, I waited. I fed the horses, checked the fences, updated the binders. The air grew cooler. Leaves turned gold and drifted against the gates. Karen's posts became more urgent, less polished. She began hinting at new legal action and state-level interventions. She posted a blurry screenshot of an email from some minor official claiming progress. Each time, I added it to the archive. Late one evening, as a pale moon rose over the oaks, a new notification popped up on my phone. A local news outlet had published an article titled, "Ranch Road Dispute Highlights Safety Concerns." The first photo was my gate. The second was Karen speaking at the fire safety meeting. The article repeated her claims, but also noted that county records show no easement, and state inspectors found no violations. For the first time, the public narrative looked balanced. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen reflecting off the binder's plastic cover. Karen had thrown everything at me: legal petitions, agencies, social media storms, and the boundary still held. The trap was working, but the final spring hadn't triggered yet. Something told me it would soon. Beyond the porch, the powder grid gleamed like moonlight across the gravel. The gate stood silent. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. I closed the laptop and went inside, the binder under my arm like a shield. End of Chapter 5, to be continued in Autumn hardened into winter, and with it the tone of the fight. Karen's posts grew sharper, less polished, more desperate. Each week a new alert, or petition, appeared on the HOA page, but fewer neighbors clicked like. The state agencies had long since closed their files, the county had reaffirmed its denial of an easement, and the fire safety committee had moved on to other business. Only Karen and a dwindling circle of loyalists kept fanning the flames. I stayed on my routine: feed the horses, check the gates, back up the footage, update the binders. By now, there were 4 thick volumes labeled Phase 1, Phase 2, Meetings, and Media. Every letter, every post, every sign, every inspector's business card was slotted into plastic sleeves with dates and cross-references. It wasn't just evidence, it was a map of the entire campaign against me. Then, just after New Year's, the real trigger appeared. I opened my mailbox to find a glossy newsletter mailed to every resident in the subdivision. The front page blared, "Emergency road approved," in bold red letters over a photo of my gate. Inside, a 2-page spread claimed the HOA had secured state support for restoring a historic access road. It even listed a start date for clearing operations and called on volunteers to assist with removal of obstructions. The newsletter was a fiction, but a dangerous one. If even a handful of people believed it and showed up with tools, I could be facing an actual mob at my fence. That was the moment the archive became more than a defensive tool. It became a counterattack. I called my lawyer friend. He came over that evening with a thermos of coffee. We spread the binders across the kitchen table. For 2 hours, we walked through every page. The survey, the county decision, the inspector's closure letters, the screenshots of Karen's posts, the photos of her sign with the HOA logo, the fake, future, emergency access placard. We drafted a single, clean narrative. Not a rant, not an accusation, just a factual timeline showing a pattern of harassment, false statements, and attempts to incite trespass. The next morning, my lawyer filed 2 things simultaneously: a civil complaint in county court seeking an injunction against Karen and the HOA for harassment and defamation, and a packet to the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division alleging deceptive practices by a nonprofit corporation. We attached the newsletter as Exhibit A. Then we waited. 2 weeks later, a sheriff's deputy in a brown uniform drove up the county lane, lights flashing. But instead of serving me, he served Karen. The cameras caught the whole scene. The deputy handing her a thick envelope, Karen's face twisting as she read the heading, her shoulders stiffening. An hour later, the HOA page went dark. Comments disappeared. The fake, emergency route sign vanished from the right of way stake overnight. 3 days later, the county court issued a temporary restraining order. No more false statements about my property. No more inciting people to enter. No more newsletters claiming government support. Any violation would carry fines. The order named both Karen and the HOA as respondents. That evening, standing at the gate with the order in my hand, I felt the tension of months drain from my shoulders. The powder grid lay undisturbed, pale under the winter sky. The locks gleamed. The cameras recorded only wind swirling dead leaves across the gravel. The local news picked up the story a week later. This time the headline read, "Court issues restraining order in HOA dispute." The article laid out the facts of the case and included quotes from the county's own denial of an easement. The photo was not of Karen, but of the bright red gates with the laminated county order posted beside them. The public narrative had flipped. My quiet patience and record keeping had become the real trap, one she had walked into herself. Karen tried one last maneuver. She filed a response, accusing me of malicious prosecution and endangering the community. But without evidence, it fizzled. The court converted the temporary injunction into a permanent one and awarded me my legal fees. The HOA board, eager to avoid further exposure, voted to remove Karen as president and settle. They sent me a formal apology letter acknowledging my property rights and promising no further attempts to access the driveway without permission. Spring returned to the ranch like a deep breath. The oaks budded green, the horses shed their winter coats, and the air smelled of damp soil and clover. The gates remained bright red, but now stood more like a symbol than a barrier. The cameras stayed up, but the footage showed only wildlife and delivery trucks again. No SUVs, no measuring tapes, no laminated signs. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of gold over the pasture, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the county lane beyond the fence. a lone car rolled by without stopping. The only sound was birdsong and the slow crunch of gravel under tires. The war was over. I thought about the phrase that had started it all. The trap they never saw coming. At first I had meant the powder grid and the tow truck, but that was just a momentary deterrent. The real trap had been patience, documentation, and restraint. Karen had assumed I would lash out or cut corners, giving her ammunition. Instead, she had left a breadcrumb trail of her own making, and when the time was right, the binders turned into a mirror she couldn't escape. As dusk deepened to indigo, I walked down to the gate, ran a hand along the cool steel tubing, and listened to the quiet. Beyond the fence, the county lane stretched empty into the distance. For the first time in a year, it felt like my land again. Not a battleground, but a home. I turned back toward the house, the powder grid faintly luminous in the starlight, and closed the gate behind me. That's the end of this wild HOA saga. If you enjoyed following along with the twists and turns on my little patch of land, stick around for more stories like this. I post new ones all the time. You can support the channel by sharing this story with a friend who loves a good property drama tale, leaving a quick like so I know you're into it, and hitting subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.